Beneath the most famous street in the world is the first American subway line to ever be built, serving Yonkers, Riverdale, Upper Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan, and Lower Manhattan. This line is what laid the foundation for the mass transit revolution of the 20th century. From using Gen 1 cars to using the future Gen 6 cars that arrive in 2024, we'll be diving into the history of the Broadway subway, including not only its past but its service patterns and how it surprisingly made a profit during the 1990s. Now, the current route runs from Yonkers Buena Vista Avenue to State Street Plaza, formerly South Ferry. Running along the entirety of Broadway, it uses a mix of Gen 5 and Gen 6 cars, which have been modified to CBTC and also have open gangways as well. It's been known for a while that there are store buildings that have been connected to various subway stations, as well as underground malls that were formed by the various pathways between certain stations, and these malls serve to fund the vast majority of subway services within the Empire Rail Zone. The service runs about every 3 minutes during the day, from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., with trains running every 10 minutes during the nighttime, from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. On certain events, service will be boosted at night to accommodate more people, the most notable being the New Year's Eve celebrations. Now let's get into the history of the line. The Broadway subway, or commonly known today as the EM1, is the first subway line in American history, dating back to 1889 with the formation of the Board of Rapid Transit Railroad Commissioners, which took over any previously existing transit line within New York City. Most of the lines that came under the new ownership of the new board were either elevated or at grade. As such, the first task was to create a proof of concept plan for a subway line. However, no one on the council agreed where and how the new subway should be built. That was until a man by the name of Charles Tyson Yerkes came into the fray. Before working on the New York City subway and the London Underground, Yerkes was a business tycoon and the subject of elevated trains, running several lines within Chicago. However, he sold off his assets to the city after losing money on certain lines, which have long since been demolished. As such, he moved to the Big Apple and had scheduled a meetup with one of the members on the transit board. Yerkes gave this councilman a proof of concept that would later turn out to be the deep bore style tunnels that made up most of the networks in New York and London, as well as many other places. In 1894, the council made its first plan of a subway line, running from 145th Street into Lower Manhattan using the deep bore construction method. It was approved by the state legislature and work began in 1895. Now, there were concerns for the structures above to cave in. However, considering how deep the subway was, it wasn't that much of a concern, and by 1901, the first portion of the subway was completed. Running from Columbus Circle to Union Square, it had 6 stations and only costs 5 cents to board. By 1904, the line extended upwards to 96th Street, and by 1907, it had made its way up to 125th Street. Now, the section of 125th Street was a bit difficult to dig given the elevation difference. It was suggested that the train go above ground for this section, but that was shot down due to inflating the cost. As such, the 125th Street section of the EM1 was very shallow, and is still very shallow to this day. By this time, other subway lines started to be constructed, such as the Park Avenue line that used commuter rail tunnels, but that's a story for another day. By 1913, the line ran from the north of Manhattan to the south, with plans to extend into the Bronx. However, the outbreak of World War I in 1914 halted those plans, but work began to resume in 1916 with the extension into the Bronx. Running from Van Cortlandt Park to State Street Plaza, the line soon became one of the most popular lines within the city, so much so that the neighbors to the north wanted a piece of the action. In 1920, the city of Yonkers asked for the subway to be extended to connect with commuter rail services within Yonkers. While several railroad operators filed lawsuits against the proposal, the construction went on as compensation for the loss of some service. The Transit Commission would split the revenue made from the Yonkers extension to the new companies affected by the service. However, they declined as they saw the stations along the Bronx portion not really gaining any money, and supposed that their revenue wouldn't be seriously affected, especially since the subway made more stops than their rail services, making it quicker to get into Manhattan using commuter services rather than the subway. The line ended at the former lower level of Yonkers Station. During the 1930s, passenger numbers on the Broadway line grew exponentially, but commuter rail wasn't looking so hot. So, when FDR came into power during 1934, the nationalization of the railways was approved by Congress, and as such, the federal rail zones were made, consisting of 10 different rail zones that would be controlled and operated by the federal government, similar to how the US governs over its states. Each rail zone was further subdivided into the type of traffic it served. Freight, commuter, and express services were managed by its own council and representatives for that specific rail zone. As such, the subways were left in this weird area, and by 1936, the decision was made to allow the Broadway subway to run up to the current area of Mercy University via commuter rail tracks. A portal was constructed and connected to the existing trackage, and the Broadway subway extended up to the former Mercy terminal. From there, another line would take up commuters up north to Albany and beyond. This went on between 1936 and 1953 until the National Subway Act was signed, making all US subways conform to the same national standard. As such, the Broadway subway was cut back to a new station called Buena Vista Avenue, and a new service was connected that ran below Madison Avenue and now served the current route. Now, this Madison Avenue route was eventually rerouted to run along the current route along the Hudson Bay, I believe. I have to go check that out later. The Broadway subway was now known as the EM1, as it was the first subway line to be built within the city, and all other rail lines would be named after the Broadway line. The EM1 would have its tunnels widened to allow the Federal Rail standard rail cars to operate on the unified system. The EM1 would see minimal changes during the 1960s, 70s, and the 80s, but it was noticeable that some parts were decaying. Hence the program for action in 1988, which upgraded the interior of the line to look more modern, yet still utilitarian, as well as putting in platform screen doors or PSDs at very crowded stations. These were all installed by 1997. On November 9, 2001, two planes struck the Twin Towers, causing service in Lower Manhattan to be suspended for the EM1 service at 9 a.m. The trains that were in Lower Manhattan were to couple up at State Street Plaza, and passengers on those connected trains would exit at State Street Plaza. Miraculously, the towers were able to stand up, and some were evacuated via helicopter while others were evacuated via ambulance. However, the towers posed a safety risk, as while they were somewhat stable, the design was incredibly flawed and could allow for a total collapse of the towers. As such, all trains that passed under the towers had their services cut, as it was decided to tear down the buildings and start a new complex from the ground up. As such, the EM1 service had to make up services that were cut back, so the line got more PSDs and more trains. But by 2005, normal service had resumed as the demolition was completed, and by 2007, the line was upgraded to handle the new CBTC equipment, as well as getting new Gen 5 cars at the time, with open gangway compatibility. The late 2000s and the early 2010s saw minimal changes to the subway line until 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic came. The line ran reduced service until 2022 when it went back to normal. As of 2025, the R211s are slated to run on the Broadway line, as well as more stations in the north getting platform screen doors. Overall, the service on the line is good, but it's not without its faults. Sometimes trains would get stuck at Buena Vista, causing delays that cascade down into the Bronx. Despite it running 22 trains an hour, there are times when the train is too damn packed. This was way more of a problem before the Gen 5 and Gen 6 gangway cars came into the fray. Much older trains like when the Gen 4s were around were really hellish for the EM1 line. Thankfully, most of the Gen 4s migrated over to other lines in Brooklyn, though you'll occasionally see a Gen 4 on the EM1 trackage because the 3rd Avenue line needs all the Gen 5 and Gen 6s it can get. Seriously, why they extend the E13 up to White Plains? Was that really necessary? Anyways, that is the entire video. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you have a good evening. God bless America.